back to Hardware Unboxed. It is part two, what's going on over there? It's part two.
I malfunctioned.
Of the April Q&A series. Part one is already on the channel, so if you want the first half of the questions, go watch that. We have plenty more questions to be answered in this one, but before we get to them...
Today's video sponsor is Thermal Grizzly and their Cryonaut Extreme, which is now available in a 2-gram syringe. This high-performance thermal paste delivers maximum thermal conductivity thanks to an extremely small particle size and layer thickness. It's also very flexible, capable of standing up to sub-zero temperatures for extreme overclocking, but also performs exceptionally well for air and water cooling applications. So if your CPU or GPU needs repasting, then I suggest checking out the Thermal Grizzly range. Link is in the video description.
Due to modern games and applications being able to utilize 8 or more threads, how much longer do you predict the quad-core CPU to last as a good option for gaming? So 7700K, 9100F, etc.
A good option. I wouldn't say they're necessarily a good option now, and not to upset people who are still using those CPUs. They're perfectly usable. I guess it depends on how you define and what you mean by a good option. They're certainly not an optimal option. I'd recommend a fairly modern sort of 6-core, 12-thread processor. But yeah, look, a 7700K, what's that, like a Core i3 10100 type performance? Certainly very usable. I guess I'll give it to you a good entry level to maybe working its way up to mid-range type performance. Depending on the type of games you play, the FPS you're targeting, there's so many variables with these conversations, it's really hard to condense them down into sort of one answer that is satisfactory for everybody because there's so many different tiers of gamers and budgets and all those sorts of things. But as a usable, reasonable solution, I expect like a Core i3 10100 to be pretty usable and a pretty good option with, you know, a mid-range to low-end GPU for, I don't know, the foreseeable really, and by that I mean the realistic lifespan that you would typically expect to be able to use such a part. It's certainly going to be usable in 2 years' time from now. I don't think it's going to be a situation like with the 6500 XT, so I'm talking about GPUs here, the Radeon RX 6500 XT, where that's just been launched, and using the lowest possible quality settings in latest AAA titles like Cyberpunk 2077, you can't really drive 60 FPS at 1080p. So to me, that product's already sort of like, how good is, like if you're after 60 FPS, it's already kind of failed. So I expect 2 years from now that product to be virtually useless, like unusable in the latest AAA titles. I don't think I could say the same thing about a decent quad core with SMT support.
Yeah, and quad cores are still being launched today in that sort of $100-ish dollar range. So until we start to see 6-core CPUs or greater start to dominate that area, then they're still going to be viable for some builds because there's still going to be a market of people using them. And yeah, maybe games will turn around in 2 years from now and games are suddenly massively slaughtering CPUs. There's some talk of Unreal Engine 5 being quite CPU demanding for some of its effects. Maybe quad cores will die in that period. But at least for now, I agree. I think they're still usable.
And it's a tough one.
For a good one.
Yeah, a good one. And that's the thing. I kind of cringe a bit when we talk about this core count thing. Yeah. Because you could get 2 years down the track from now and we could be looking at like, you know, a 40% IPC increase over today's CPUs, or even 20%, let's say. And there could be quad core options released in 2 years that comfortably beat the 6-core 12-thread CPUs of today. Like imagine if the 5800X 3D, there was a quad-core option of that CPU with a 20% IPC increase. That would murder pretty much all of the gaming CPUs we have available today, and it would only be a quad-core with 8 threads.
Yeah.
So it's really about the performance of the cores, but not going into those sort of crazy scenarios, talking about the existing quad cores we have and when they won't be usable for the latest games. I would think we'd have to be looking, and in a reasonable sense, I'm not talking about with an RTX 3090 and you're looking for absolutely perfect. That's the other thing, like where, in these discussions, where do you set your acceptable level? Like if you've spent $100 on your CPU and $300 on your GPU and you've built a whole system for, you know, under $1,000 US, if you're playing the latest and greatest game and you get the odd frame stutter, like very minute, and it only happens maybe even once every few minutes, how much do you care?
Yeah.
Like
You built a budget system.
If you're buying a Core i9 1200K with an RTX 3080 or greater, you do not want to see a single frame hitch. You just want that frame pacing to be absolutely perfect because you've spent like $3,000-$4,000. But if you're spending under $1,000, I think that's where the expectations have to be adjusted on what it is that you're getting. I think if you're playing the latest and greatest demanding stuff and there's the odd stutter or frame hitch that doesn't really impact the gaming performance too much, it might be noticeable, but it doesn't spoil it entirely. Yeah, I think people in those price ranges are probably willing to put up with that.
Yep.
All right. Do you guys plan to review peripherals, mice, keyboards, headphones, etc.? I feel like your guys' in-depth statistical approach to reviewing would be great for headphones. I mean, I could answer this one really quickly and just say no, but not really the point of the Q&A series. I'll go a bit more into this one because this actually leads into an interesting discussion, which perhaps some very valuable information for those of you who want to start your own YouTube channel or have your own tech YouTube channel. So the reason, I guess we'll start from the start. So the answer is no. And the reason for that is, well, there's a lot of reasons. One reason would be that would be a whole new venture. So we do monitors, CPUs, GPUs primarily, motherboard VRMs we sort of dabble in. And that's our core focus. And we do a good job of that. And we're able to give a really in-depth statistical approach, as you say, because we have a wealth of knowledge on the subject. And not just like, hey, we're really smart, we know how to do this stuff. It's more experience. Like we've reviewed so many products previously. We understand what you guys are looking for in the product. Just there's a whole lot of experience that goes with the know-how of testing, all that sort of stuff. And then to start with, I don't know that much about headphones. Honestly, I don't want to know my opinion on headphones because I used so few headphones. So it'd be like fumbling and starting out from scratch, and maybe that'd be a fun side project, but it wouldn't be up to the quality that we'd want on the channel. I'd have to put a lot of time in behind the scenes before I started doing that, is what I'm saying, and I don't have that time unless I can clone myself. So that's that part of it. Are you happy with that?
Yep. Do you want to talk about the second part, which is...
Yeah, so the second part is I suppose, what would you say, the more business side of it, the more YouTuber side of it?
Yes, the algorithm side.
So apart from the fact that we don't have enough time, I'm not passionate about it and I don't want to do it, the other side is, well, the algorithm, it's kind of like as much of the algorithm as it is you guys watching this video right now. And I try to help a lot of guys behind the scenes. There's a lot of smaller YouTubers I constantly talk with. They ask me questions, how did we grow our channel and stuff like that. And I have a look at what they're doing, and I sort of see some of these guys making the mistake that I sort of call it the classic tech site, the tech website approach to YouTube. So going back a bit, there was before YouTube, maybe not before Linus, but before YouTube really became a thing on the tech scene, there were lots of tech sites. I'm sure you guys are familiar with, there was countless amounts of tech websites. And some of them tried to transition to YouTube and almost all of them failed. Not all of them, but almost all of them failed. And my belief as to why they failed is because they tried to do the tech website thing on YouTube and it doesn't work. And we got lucky because we sort of went a narrow lane and decided big GPU comparisons, big CPU comparisons, not really peripheral reviews, especially once we got going. And then we dabbled into the monitors, and that was sort of a slow road in, which we've talked about plenty of times before. But we selected a few things to really focus on. And it turns out that's a really good thing, because what makes a video successful primarily is the click-through rate, which is why clickbait or
clickbait
forms of bait have gotten so popular, because YouTube will grade a video on how many people clicked it. So how many people saw the thumbnail, the title, and clicked it. So that's metric number one. I'd say that's probably first and foremost, most important thing. You got to get people to click. And then watch time. So were they actually baited into watching a crap video that they're not interested in, and they just click away straight away, which is of no worth to YouTube because they want to keep people active on the platform? Or did they get baited into watching a video, then really enjoy the video and watch a good percentage of it? And I think about close to halfway is deemed a really good result for YouTube. And so with us, for example, where I'm going with this narrow lane thing is, you expect to see a hardware unboxed video in your inbox once every few days. You expect it to be sort of a GPU thing, a CPU thing, or a monitor thing. And we've built up a pretty strong audience for those categories.
Yep.
But if I threw out a mouse review or a soundbar review or a camera review or something like that, it would just bomb big time, because most of the people who subscribe to our channel want to see a big benchmark between some stuff, or they want to see the next exciting monitor. They're not really caring about a mouse review from us, so most of you probably wouldn't click it. There's a percentage of you that would, but it would be significantly lower than what we would normally get. The video would basically be killed in the first hour by the almighty algorithm, because it wouldn't meet the channel average, and that would get buried, and it would actually hurt our next video and slow the momentum of the channel. So you want to make sure that every video does quite well. And diversifying, like, I guess people subscribe to channels for certain things, which I didn't think would be a thing initially. I get why a lot of tech sites thought that they could be a component channel where they review a bit of everything. But people really want to go to a Gamer's Nexus or a Hardware Unboxed or, Linus or whoever it is. Like, Linus can diversify because he's more, I think, entertainment. And that's not a knock on Linus. It's just, he's gone about things a bit differently. So, yeah, that's why we don't have reviews of random things, because it just wouldn't do well on the channel. We can't diversify to that degree.
And it would hurt the other content.
It would hurt the other content, future content especially.
Yeah, if we wanted to, for whatever reason, review headphones, as the example used in this question, we would need to basically set up a separate channel. And we'd need to grow that from the start, which obviously be a lot of work. And realistically at this point, there's a lot of channels out there. And for most categories of items, there is someone who does a really good job of reviewing them, at least in the tech scene. Obviously I can't say the same for like washing machines. Maybe there's a washing machine channel that I'm not aware of.
I'm sure there is.
But, for example, laptop content, there's hundreds of channels doing really good in-depth laptop content. There's channels that are dedicated to covering things like mice and keyboards. There's channels dedicated to covering these exact topics of headphones. And really the majority of people who are really into that area know those channels, go to those channels. So again, you're trying to compete with those channels, but doing it on a channel that's doing its own thing. So you kind of, I'm sure people would love to see our expertise applied to, and our testing methods applied to lots of different categories. But realistically, there's a lot of things going against you, and you're fighting with those already established channels that do what you were saying. They stick to the one topic. They're really focused, and all the people that, the audience for that channel is built up to focus on those products. So, there's a lot of things that make it hard to do those sorts of channels. And it's why you see, giant enterprises like Linus have separate channels for things like their news content, which they put on TechLinked. And, they've got an Apple channel, for example, that covers Apple products. That approach to doing things is currently the way that YouTube is optimized. So,
and it's all because of the click-through rate.
Yeah, it's all because of the click-through rate and those sorts of things. So, we get asked these questions a lot of times in the Q&As, and I think we've brushed over it from time to time by just sort of saying, we're not interested in this topic, we're not interested in that topic, but really it goes beyond that into how the channels work and how YouTube works. So, the reason why I think we've been successful is we've stuck to the things that are really good for us, and the reason why a channel like Gamers Nexus is really successful is for similar reasons. And even smaller channels that are really building their audience today, like I think Jared's Tech is a great example of this. Who
I wouldn't even call him a smaller channel.
Well, not a smaller channel, but he's grown significantly in the last couple of years. Jared started by dabbling in a large range of different pieces of content, but sort of his main thing was laptops, and that was sort of where the core of his audience was gravitating towards. And then when he started really focusing on that and making that the core of his channel really started accelerating and taking off. And I think that's where a lot of these channels that you see today that focus on just a couple of things and are known for being, Gamers Nexus known for case reviews. We're sort of known for monitor reviews. Jared's maybe known for laptops. That's where a lot of the success comes from today.
Yeah.
So
I think as a small tech YouTube channel, you think you have to be everywhere doing everything to be relevant. But it's quite the opposite. Yeah, you don't want to be diversifying all over the place. You can pick two maybe 3 products. I think 2's probably the way to go, especially initially, or probably 1's really the way to go initially. People think, oh, I don't want to keep doing laptop reviews because, people are going to get sick of that and they're not going to come. But it's actually the opposite. People want to keep coming and seeing your opinion of the next product because, they trust your opinion. You've got a catalog of, work, and if people are subscribing, they obviously like your work and they think your opinion's valuable. So they want to keep seeing that basically. And then when you throw them a curveball with something unrelated, they're like, oh, I'm not really interested in that from you. So I have a headphone guy. I'll go to him.
It's like if you're watching, your sports F1, like you're watching that all the time, then suddenly you turn the F1, they're showing the cricket.
Yeah.
And it's like, I'm turning off. Like that's not for me. That's not what I came to watch. Right? Similar thing applies on YouTube.
It is. It really is. All right. What do you think defines hardware as obsolete? I did that with 2 hands. Just pretend I did. Something you can't use nowadays, something that will perform worse than newer alternatives, or something that doesn't support the most current technologies. For example, is the GeForce MX2 obsolete due to being AGP? I would say so, amongst other things. Yep. Is Ryzen, first generation Ryzen, obsolete due to being lower power and efficiency than newer generations? I'd say no in that example. Is the GTX 1080 Ti obsolete due to not having ray tracing? I'd also say certainly not in that example. Really, I mean, there are some examples where, obviously that's obsolete because it can't be used in any practical sense. So like an AGP graphics card. So anything obvious like that, sure, that's well and truly obsolete. But it's like the eye of the beholder. Like, is a Core i7-7700K obsolete because it's a quad core? It's like, I mean, it's in my opinion, it's obsolete for high-end gaming because there are just significantly better solutions, but it's still very usable. You can have a lot of fun with it. Yep. There's a lot of games that can still be played with it. There's a lot of things that can still be done with it beyond just gaming. So depending on what you want will define whether or not it's obsolete. And that goes for really everything. Again, ray tracing, if you must have ray tracing, if that's something that you have to be on the cutting edge, you want to play Dying Light 2 with ray tracing enabled or Cyberpunk 2077, GTX 1080 Ti would be obsolete. I think for most people, that particular graphics card is far from obsolete and is surprisingly still very usable in today's latest and greatest games.
Yeah, I think if you, in the sort of very general sense of obsolete, where we sort of looked through these examples and we easily identified that the GeForce MX2 is obsolete. I think the very minimum that the hardware part would have to meet is being sort of below the performance of the minimum tier of today. Mm-hmm. So if we think about, for example, even today, there are still dual core processors being sold. Mm-hmm. So you would say that all single core processors are now obsolete, right? Like today you could very easily go and buy an entry-level, extremely cheap dual core, mm-hmm. and you'd have no problems doing that. Similar with like a GeForce MX2. It's clearly well below the performance of today's entry-level cards. And I think once hardware reaches that in terms of performance, it's pretty much obsolete.
Sorry, go on. Sorry.
But I think there's other things that could make something obsolete as well. Like, for example, if the industry shifts towards a new connectivity thing, which again, the AGP example here, you shift to PCIe or PCI, then PCIe, you're going to get issues where you can't use it with the latest hardware, which again, that is something that is going to make something, generally speaking, obsolete.
Trend towards it, certainly.
Yeah, so I think those are the areas I think would be obsolete. And in both these, the example of first-gen Ryzen, for example, that some of those parts are not below the minimum level of today. They still are compatible with today's hardware. You can buy, even if we moved to AM5 socket and you couldn't put that in a modern motherboard, they still have PCIe slots, so you can still put in relevant GPUs. They still have USB ports and SATA ports and all that. So, all those things I don't think make it obsolete yet. But when you see big industry changes, like for example, if all upcoming games forced ray tracing and had no non-ray tracing modes, then a product like the 1080 Ti would quickly become obsolete.
Yep.
So that's how I'd sort of define it.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's largely subjective, but there are clear instances where it is. Because even with the dual core, you could certainly say a dual core, especially like, what is it, the new Acceleron, you could easily say it's obsolete for gaming.
Yes.
However, what games do you play? And there are certainly games that will play on that part.
Probably fine for a basic office machine.
They're certainly not the latest and greatest cutting edge games, so I suppose in that sense it is obsolete for the latest and greatest games. But yeah, anyway. Overall, what has been your standout GPU from either team this generation? I think the standout GPU for me has been the 6500 XT.
Are you talking about standout from a bad perspective? Because it wasn't clarified, I guess.
No, it wasn't. That was, for me, that was the standout. The GPU that was so far separated from the rest of the GPUs was the 6500 XT.
Which is probably fair.
And I'm kind of joking, but I'm also really not joking. That was a standout bad product in my opinion, and continues to be, and will only get worse as time goes on. So a bit of an instant classic there on the bad standout. A good standout GPU.
Yeah, I mean, you probably have to go back to your value options like usual, right?
There's been no standouts because of what's happened. But let's say that we didn't have the whole...
Pricing wasn't an issue, let's say.
I'm trying to find words that I can use to describe the last 2 years.
If it wasn't a dumpster fire of epic proportions...
Thank you. That's far toned down from where I was going with that one. And we looked at like MSRP. I think for me, it'd be something like an RTX 3080. I think that's the product that I was most... Again, it's hard to say because when I reviewed that product, we actually genuinely thought it would be worth $700, and a month or so after release, you'd be able to buy it for $700.
Yep.
And that was a huge step forward, really cool product. 6800 XT was really cool as well. That was a huge step forward for AMD, seeing them so competitive. But the huge dumpster fire was already very apparent by the time that arrived. So it kind of like deflated its tires. Yeah. So I think for me, it was probably the RTX 3080.
Yeah, I think something like an RTX 3060 Ti at the MSRP has proven over time to be a very good value product if that was available for the MSRP. Even at times, it has been a good buy based on the current scalper market pricing. But I think the 3060 Ti was getting pretty close to products like the 3070, but it was cutting down $100 from price. It
was a good value product for sure.
For a $400 GPU, which is sort of a common mainstream mid-range price point these days, that would have been offering very, very good performance, like pretty close to a 2080 Ti from the previous generation, but for $400. So I think for me, that was probably the standout GPU. And then from AMD, obviously, getting back into the high end is probably the standout from their perspective.
Yeah, it's hard because like that's standout value, but I think for me, the ultimate wow factor of being really impressed.
The 6900 XT was impressive, and the 6800 XT as more of the value
6900
option.
XT, 68, you mean?
Well, the 6900 XT was their fastest GPU.
Yeah, it was kind of dumb.
So, but it was kind of dumb.
Yeah.
So.
Well, at the MSRP.
I get what you're saying. Like the 6800 XT was the 6900 XT that made sense to buy.
It's tough because if it wasn't the last 2 years wasn't what they were. Each GPU sort of a bit of a, I don't know if standout's the right word, but it was a bit special in its own way because, as I said, it was really exciting to see AMD come back from, well, they were nowhere. 5700 XT was their previous generation flagship, which was, they were mid-range contenders. Well, they were mid-range contenders.
Yep.
And they came back and they had a genuine high-end product. So that was huge. As for standouts, I don't know. Don't know.
As you showed in your 5800X3D review, the 5800X3D scales very poorly with faster RAM. Will large cache sizes take away the need for fast, low latency RAM, and will you do any further testing?
I don't know if I would word it that way, honestly. I've seen a few people say, one weakness of the 5800X3D is the fact that it doesn't take advantage or it doesn't require low latency, high frequency memory. And I'm like, interesting. That's not how I would have looked at that or phrased it. I would have thought, wow, a real benefit of this CPU is that you don't need to throw expensive memory at it.
Yeah.
Like relatively inexpensive run-of-the-mill memory will allow you to extract pretty much the performance shown in reviews, making that CPU significantly better value than the 1200K, which required like premium DDR5 memory to even match it. So yeah, I don't agree with the wording of that question. I think a great strength of the 5800X3D is that it's less memory sensitive.
Yeah, as opposed to scaling poorly, which is how it's phrased.
Yeah, which it doesn't scale poorly. Yeah. So I find that one a bit strange. I think maybe people are hoping, the performance shown is amazing. Now, if you pair it with high, really premium memory, it's even more amazing. I guess that's maybe where the disappointment's creeping in. It's like, what you're seeing is sort of what you get. There's not too much more. You can certainly tune timings, and I'm sure you get a little bit more performance, but yeah, it's probably not as significant, or definitely isn't as significant as what we've seen previously. So I guess I get that, but that's not the right way to look at it, in my opinion. Will you do any further testing? So I don't think I'm going to bother doing any memory scaling stuff because the day one review had DDR4 3200CL14 versus DDR4 3800, which is about as fast as you're going to be able to run realistically. CL16, very small difference between the two memory types there. So we can't really show faster memory because you're not one-to-one with the fabric. No point going slower, and there's no point showing anything between. So the day one review was the memory scaling video. All right, considering the lock-in nature of a platform, i.e. AM4, do you expect to see some budget offerings when AM5 releases? Unlike Ryzen 5000, it can't rely on older CPUs to make up the budget offerings. Yeah, definitely there will be, perhaps not initially, but there will be affordable AM5 CPUs because if there wasn't, they'd have to keep AM4 alive, and there'd be this weird, like, why would you buy AM4 when AM5's there? And
yeah, exactly.
It'd be messy. No, they definitely want to incentivize people to jump on AM5 because if we get like Raptor Lake, and that will be a carryover for the LGA 1700 platform, if you wanted a budget-friendly CPU, you'd probably just go with Intel. So they'd lose a huge part of the market share. And the market share is an important thing. You really want to get people, and that's why AM4 was such a genius move, because
it's probably the most successful move that AMD made with the Ryzen platform.
It's the most successful CPU platform ever, I would say.
Yeah, in terms of one socket. Oh, for sure.
Because
you have to go way back to like the Core 2 Duo era with like the LGA 775 as being the previous most successful.
Yeah, it's probably right. Yeah, AM4 was a huge success and a big part of why it was very easy to recommend Ryzen, because sure, performance wasn't quite as good, but they were really good value options. And although the road got a bit rocky there at times, they promised support. Anyway, they came through with it in the end. We sort of had to do a bit of pushing back there, but hopefully with AM5 they can come out and they can offer, or they can guarantee support for a certain period of time and actually come through with it on this time and not go, oh, that actually turned out to be too hard, let's not do that anymore. But if they do, I think that'll be a deciding factor for next generation. If AMD come out and say, we're supporting AM5 for at least the next 3 generations, which will be one more generation than presumably Intel will support, that's a big deal. And people say, oh, people don't upgrade every generation, or they don't upgrade every other generation, which is absolutely not true.
Yeah.
Like if you had bought a Ryzen 5 2600 on a good quality B450 board, which there were some, but MSI had like the Tomahawk, for example, that was a pretty good quality board. The amount of, you could stick like, you could stick a 5800X 3D on that board. Not saying you would necessarily go that premium, but even like a Ryzen 5 5600.
Big upgrade.
You can use the
couple of generations.
Same memory, same motherboard, quick and easy. Go down your local store, buy the CPU, stick it in there. Huge performance upgrade. All it required was probably a BIOS update, and away you are. So, yeah, to say that people wouldn't take advantage of that, I think is definitely wrong. And I think there's plenty of people that have taken advantage of the upgradability of AM4 to this point in time.
Yeah, so I think Ryzen 5000 was a unique situation where they could rely on parts like the Zen 2 processors for their sort of $200, $100
they just had
range.
so many premium products using that node that you just could not release.
So many options. Whereas I think with the upcoming parts, they're going to they're basically going to have to. They're going to have some sort of budget part and get people into the AM5 platform, get people used to it, sort of.
They've got to incentivize people to invest in it.
Yeah, so a Ryzen 5 70, just trying to think of what it will be, 7600? Because it's a 7000 series is going to be the next gen.
Sounds like an Intel CPU.
So they're going to need a Ryzen 5 7600 type product that costs like about
a Ryzen 5 product.
Yeah.
A Ryzen 3, Ryzen 5 product.
A Ryzen 5 non-X part that's really good value. Get people on the AM5 platform, and the dividends will pay for themselves after.
Around the $200 US mark.
Yeah. They'll set up that platform.
Yep.
All right, and that's it for part 2 of the Q&A series and all of the Q&A series that we'll be doing for this month of April. I know it's disappointing, it's devastating even that we've reached this point of the month, but plenty of great questions that we were asked by both the YouTube community and also our Patreon members and FloatPlay members on our Discord chat. So yeah, if you want to support us directly, Patreon and Float Plane, as I just mentioned, is a great way to do that. Links in the description below. We just did our live stream for the month. So if
we did.
Well, by the time that we're filming this, I think this is coming out a few days later. But anyway,
let's not complicate things.
If you sign up next month, you'll be able to participate in the monthly live stream or just watching the video on demand thing later. Behind the scenes videos, Discord community, it's pretty good.
Pretty good. Yeah, Discord, I'd say pretty good. Pretty good. I give them a pretty good, yeah.
Maybe underrating them a little bit, but yeah, I think that's pretty much it for this one.
Yep.
So I'm your host, Tim.
I'm your host, Steve.
We'll see you in the next one.